Welcome back to another episode of The Loco Fit Show, where we redefine what healthy means to you. I'm your host, Lauren Conlon, and this week I'm joined by our team mental health counselor, Rick, and we're going to be talking about how to find the right partner. Happy New Year, everybody. This is the first podcast that has been coming out in the new year. Yeah, hope you guys had a great holiday season. Hope everybody enjoyed their new year, whatever they did. And yeah, let's get into this. So this is kind of there's no one perfect answer here, right? And this is going to be more of like a discussion.
No, there is. I'm going to give you guys the secret.
Okay, we're starting off the year with, we're not going to be like nuanced anymore, guys. We're changing the podcast. Fuck it. We're just bro science all day.
Mm-hmm. I'm just going to slowly draw it out over the entire course of the podcast.
The hack?
No, of course not. I don't know.
Relationship hacks.
Is that our next podcast, relationship hacks?
It should be, actually, like taking all of the like horrible advice that people give online.
Be fun.
That would be really good. If you guys have anything that is maybe you don't know if it's horrible, right? Maybe it could be just questionable. Like, is this legit? So finding the right partner, there's so many people who are like, well, I can't find anybody. I can't meet anybody. So we just wanted to talk through that.
This is a fairly common question and one that oftentimes people will struggle with, especially after getting out of a relationship. Usually the end of a relationship, people, not that they necessarily will start therapy, but oftentimes breakups, bad relationships, bring people to a point of pain. And so they're looking for answers and they're searching, and for this, it's a difficult question to answer because it's kind of like, where do you start? How do you find the right one? And first and foremost, and I'm going to quote a variety of different therapists and psychologists throughout this podcast today. And I guess I would say the first place to really start would be shared values, shared interests, like have an understanding of what those things are to you and what you're looking for. What are your values? What are your shared interests with somebody? And I think the other way to really go about this too is to stop focusing on other people and to really focus on yourself. Like I've heard Jordan Peterson give variations of this. Are you the kind of partner that you're looking for? Are you the mate in somebody else that that you're wanting in them? Are you that version of them? Are you clean? Are you safe? Are you stable? Are you happy? Are you ambitious? Are you sound? There's a lot of different things, but I think the focus of it is until you can become the person you're looking for, then the work to be done to find that person is within yourself. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And that's where I wanted to start this, because I think that really is the root of everything. Because if you're in a place where maybe you're not going to be able to be a good partner or not really sure what you're looking for in a partner, you would probably agree, right? That like you're going to attract maybe either the wrong person or the wrong type of people that you've been attracting for a while, right? Like if you've been dating people who are like have narcissist tendencies and all these things, and you're typically drawn towards that, or you're really drawn towards people who are broken or avoidant or whatever it might be, right? Like put whatever label on it. If you haven't done that work on yourself to avoid those people and patterns and behaviors, you're probably going to continue to fall into that, right? Like you would say that you would see that over and over again. Like, why am I dating the same person like for the 5th time? And it's like you're attracting that because you are either trying to change something within them, or you haven't worked on what would you say, maybe like your self-perception of you not deserving that, right?
So are you talking about like maybe settling? And
yeah,
there are power dynamics.
That's not just with people who are narcissists. No. Obviously, that's everybody.
I think with obviously, and I'll make a comment on it, and then I kind of want to move it aside because I don't want to focus too much on personality disorders. Personality disorders in general, like narcissism. If you find yourself where you've dated multiple narcissists, definitely I would want you to start doing some self-exploratory work and saying like, why am I finding myself attracted to this type of person who's prone to use me, who lacks empathy, who is designed to basically look at me as like, I'm here to service you, and only exist in the realm of what can you do for me? In those relationships can leave somebody feeling very empty, very used, hurt, and abandoned, because there's no real emotional connection. And so to me, the work to be done would be, what is it inside you? What's been happening in your life? What dynamics, what things, what are you searching for? that's initially attracting you to these people. And don't get me wrong, for those of you who have been in narcissistic relationships, they're very charming initially. And it's very easy. Anybody can be susceptible to a narcissist charm because they're really good at reading the room. They're really good at picking up signals, and they've been generally created to do this, throughout their life experiences. And so it's just kind of like learning to pick apart, not necessarily what they're saying, but to start giving yourself time. And what I mean by that is, one of the great indicators of when you're finding somebody who is a right match for you is when a person's behaviors start to align with what they're actually saying. And so I try and encourage people when you're dating to ignore what the person is saying, because it's so easy for them to tell you what you want to hear, to present the case that you want to hear, to be the person that they think that you want them to be. And in our minds, we do this wonderful, shitty thing where we make the person out to be who we want them to be rather than listening to who they're really saying that they are. And the only way to truly get an idea of who the authentic person is to take a step back sometimes, give it enough space to say like, okay, what are their behaviors telling me? If I stopped and I silenced this and I would just to evaluate their responsiveness, their communication patterns, their tendencies to be present in the relationship, what is that telling you? Are they taking the initiative to plan dates? Are they listening to you? Are they asking questions and feeding back? Are they doing things that you want to do? And not just initially, not just within the first week or 2 or 3 or 4, but I mean over a significant period of time. I really want people to start evaluating and judging people based off of their actions and not their words, because to me, love is best defined through actions and decisions, not as an emotion.
I guess it's hard because I think sometimes people want to make sure that they're doing the right thing. So it's I should be communicating more, or I should be trying to plan, or I should be trying to be that forward person. Mm-hmm. But then to your point, that can sometimes cloud the vision of everything, because then you're I'm saying all these things and they're agreeing, but is that really what they want to do, right? Or is that really just kind of masking that they don't have high motivations to go after this? But it's this balancing act of if you're both just kind of avoidant, I'll just wait to see if someone plans this. I'm waiting to see if they're going to reach out, right? That's, I think, this really tough dynamic that a lot of people find themselves in now, especially, at least from what I've heard in the dating world and seen and all that. And nobody kind of really knows where people's intentions lie. So then it's if you're super standoffish, because you're not standoffish, but you're, okay, I'm just going to observe. But then if that person doesn't say anything, maybe they're waiting for you to say, right? It's one of those hard things to balance. And of course, that's going to come down to communication, but it's really hard to do that when you're first meeting someone. Mm-hmm. This is not I've known someone for months now and we kind of generally understand where each other's at. You know, in that getting to know people stages, I think sometimes people can struggle with well, how much do I say or not say? Because then I'm waiting to see what their response is. But then if they're thinking the exact same thing, then it's
well, and right there to me it's okay, you're somehow filtering your authentic version of yourself. Mm-hmm. And I would rather you not do that. Mm-hmm. I would rather you be you initially from the get-go, rather than trying to conform to what the person thinks that they want. And we all do this, right? I mean, we're trying to get this person to like us. Mm-hmm. And so, especially if you're attracted to them initially, you're going to, naturally sometimes silence yourself. They might say something and you might not disagree with it. Or, yeah, that's fun. I love hiking. And it's you haven't hiked in ever. And now the person's let's go to
Google's hiking juice.
Let's go to, Tennessee and go for a few hikes. Let's get a weekend and do that. And you're about that hiking thing. Yeah, I lied, and I don't want to hike. And so now you're starting to, eventually that dopamine phase wears off. Mm-hmm. That initial honeymoon phase of, I like them, they like me, everything they do is really cute, even the things that are different from, my personality or my lifestyle, all that is cute. Well, that eventually fades. And when that fades, you're left with the reality of that person. And I always would say to people, the sooner that reality comes full circle, the better off you're going to be, because I don't want you being on a date and silencing yourself. I don't want you thinking, well, I can't share this or shouldn't share this. Now, by all means, there is too much too soon, right? I don't want to create that environment, but I don't want you to not be your authentic self.
I guess I more so meant in the terms of like, okay, watching their actions instead of just hearing what their words are saying. But at what point, like, someone has to take the initiative? So is it like, is someone always taking the initiative and then someone is always waiting? Or is it like both people are like, well, I'm going to wait for that person to take the initiative because I'm going to wait and watch their actions. You see what I'm saying? Like, you could both end up in that situation. So then it's like, how do people navigate that? Because then it's like, well, I don't know what so-and-so thinks and I don't know what this, so I'm just going to wait. And then they're having that same conversation potentially. Well, or maybe they just don't like you, which is also could be a thing.
And this is exactly where the crux of communication starts to come in. So if you're starting to date somebody, if we were dating and I met you wherever, at a party or at a club, or your friend introduced us, okay, and I get your number and we're texting, and I find myself starting or initiating the majority of the conversations in the morning with you. Like, I wake up, there's no text messages from you, but so I start the conversations, right? And then you interact with me and you feed back into it and we have great banter all day or whatever it is. Well, maybe after that first week, I might confront you on that. And I might say, hey, Lauren, it's been really great getting to know you. I've really enjoyed this, you know. But I kind of find myself, you know, in this slightly weird position where every morning I'm the one reaching out to you. And I just would like to know if this is something that, you know, do you like where this is going? If so, it's kind of important for me to know that you take an interest in me once in a while. And I would really like to hear from you in the morning on occasion. At which point, the person might be like, yeah, you know, maybe I've been a little bit more reserved. I just didn't know how to approach this. But yeah, now that I know, great, no problem. And so is that an awkward conversation maybe to have within a first week? Sure. But it's a real conversation. It's a real conversation to say, look, I like you. I'm not just wasting time. I would like to know if you like me too. And one of the ways that you can demonstrate that you like me is by putting effort into the relationship. I don't want to be the only one doing this. And so after that first week, if you're not doing that anymore, now your actions are starting to tell me something, right? It's not just she's new, she's shy, she doesn't know. We had communication. We started to talk about this. Is this an indication that she doesn't like me? Is this just a value of who she is? She doesn't like to be on the phone, and maybe I should temper my expectations with that. That's where you start to explore it. But if you don't have that conversation, and this is the part where it's like, I think sometimes people are worried about, I don't want to necessarily say coming on too strong, but they're all worried about like these kind of categories, like, oh, this is going to be too strong, or I'm going to be too awkward, or he's going to think I'm a stage 5 clinger, or whatever, right? And so we don't want to be this psycho person who's like, oh my God, I like you, you know, but
why didn't you text me this morning?
Yeah, like staring at your phone all day is not helping. And so that also, I would ask you to check this against, is this coming from an anxious space, or are you generally, you know, wanting this other person to engage with you because you're having a difficult time gauging their interest?
No, that answered it completely. And I think that's really tough for a lot of people. And that's what I wanted to get this answer out of this question, because I feel like there's this weird space for a lot of people. And then what ends up happening is, like, you kind of end up a few weeks in or a few months in and you're still kind of like, oh, I'm kind of casually dating, you know, but then it's like, what is this, right? Or like, where, not even what is this, like, okay, are we official or not? But it's more so like, where are these intentions, right? Because for a lot of people, they may be dating multiple people. They may be, you know, talking to multiple people, whatever it might be. So it's kind of one of those things that I think having that conversation up front, like you said, there a lot of times are this like fear of like this label. But I think it can be approached in the right way. Not like, hey, I'm texting every morning, like, do you not like me? It's like, okay, like that wouldn't be, it would be more so like you said, I'm enjoying this, like this and that. Is this something that, like, you know, you want to reciprocate, like, is, you know, whatever, like express whatever it is. And then the person could be like, oh, hey, like, you know what? I really like when you text me first. And then you could be like, okay, well, noted. Now I know that. Like, then you have the decision to make. Do I want that or do I not? But I think it really is about laying that out. And it's just hard because, like I said, there is that fear of that label of either, you know, you're too detached or you're like too interested, or, you know, is this person seeing other people? And then you don't want to be like asking that right away, but then, you know, there's just a lot to balance. So I think a lot of people find themselves in this like awkward situation of like wanting to know, but then it's like gone too long before they can really like, it's like, well, it's already been so long, I'm not going to bring it up now.
And I would tell you, bring it up now rather than wait even longer before it becomes this like systemic issue.
Logically, that makes sense. But emotionally, you're like, well, already here, you know, but this is why we're doing this podcast, because I think it's so important. Just talking with friends and just, you know, clients, and just knowing like this is something that a lot of people struggle with. And this is men and women. It doesn't really matter who the individual is, you know, and I think that people being upfront and honest about like their intentions as soon as possible, is nice, even though it's harsh. Like nobody likes to hear like, hey, this is where I'm at, or like, no, I can't do this, or like, but it's better to know that than like, again, a few months go by and then you're like, oh, well, this is even harder.
And sometimes, and I think this is an important quality and aspect to really understand within yourself as well, there are power dynamics that exist in relationships. There are some people who are more natural leaders who kind of assume more of the, I don't want to call it dominant role. Let's just call it the leadership role, more assertive. And there's people who generally like to, I don't want to necessarily call it submissive, but like they let the other person kind of just take the lead on things. And so if you're that type of person, fine. And maybe you find, you know, slightly more assertive people and in charge people a little bit more attractive, and that's okay. And so that dynamic can kind of play out.
Do you share that early on? Like, or do you let that just unfold? Some people would say, oh, you should bring that up and say like, this is kind of what I'm looking for. Or some people would say, no, just watch their actions. And then if their actions are in line with what you're interested in, then you move forward. And if they're not, then that person isn't for you. I
tell people all the time, I'm not a mind reader, and neither is the person that you're with. So the more descriptive, the more communicative you can be, the more expressive you can be in telling me what your needs and wants and desires are, the more I can react and give you what you want. Don't assume that I know. Tell me. Tell me everything that I need to know so that I know whether or not this is either one, the right relationship for me, or two, give me the cheat sheet. Give me the code to you. I want to know what it means to love you, to be in a relationship with you, to understand you. I can figure those things out over time, or you can tell me, and I can take the guesswork out of it and learn to meet your needs the way that you want them. And I'm not saying that any person is going to meet your needs 100% of the time, because that's ridiculous. If you're thinking that, like, here's your reality call, right? And it's time to wake up and stop being naive in that sense.
But you see where I'm asking? Like, yeah. I feel like there's two competing, thought patterns as to like what to do. And, you know, I think it can be tough because early on, I'm not talking about someone who's been dating. I'm talking about early on. Like, it's hard to know to like, you don't want to come across a certain way or say a certain thing. But at the same time, to your point, it's like, people aren't mind readers. So if you're like, no, I want someone to be like assertive and dominant, and I want them to text me first and plan things and do this and do that. But like, some people would say, well, they're going to do it if they're the right person for you. And then other people would say, no, you need to communicate that and then let their actions. So would that be like a summary of that? Like, kind of early on and be like, listen, like, this is what I'm looking for.
Look, and I think some of this relies on honesty, right? So if you're telling me, Rick, I like somebody who's assertive, who's in charge, who texts me, who makes plans. If I'm a person who isn't that way, am I listening to that going, well, I really like her and I really would love to see where this goes, so I'm going to now do those things without that being an authentic part of who I really am. So part of this relies on two people being honest, which unfortunately isn't there. So I think some of it is a little bit of a game sometimes in the beginning, where you're like, okay, I'm going to tell you some of the things that I want, and let's see how you respond. And, you know, again, I think sometimes in the very beginning of a relationship, within the first like week or two, you are feeling each other out. You're learning. And so I think the more open you are and understanding to those things, like, yeah, you're going to tell them certain things that you want, and let's see how they respond. And then you're going to continue to see whether or not this is a facade that they put up just to impress me, because now that we're dating, is it still continuing, or is it starting to drop off? And if it is dropping off, how are you communicating what your needs are at that point? You know, and so it's a little bit of a give and take at that point, but I still would prefer people to be open and honest, and understand that, yes, there are people who are going to use that against you. There are people who are going to hurt you. There are people who aren't going to be authentic and honest and real. That's life. There's no psychologist or therapist who can guard you against the dangers of the world. That's just, you're dating. Love is a risk, and I think everybody understands that. Most mature people understand that. And so you are taking a risk. You're giving somebody access to you in a vulnerable space, And, you can get hurt in that space. It doesn't necessarily mean that the person who hurt you is a bad person, and it doesn't make you a bad person. But sometimes, this is how you find out whether or not two people are really right for one another. And so it's just that learning space and being understanding in there. I will say too, because sometimes people are talking about, when we're talking about being assertive or a little bit more passive, and we've talked about attachment styles in the past. And so one of the things that relates to or helps people understand this is when we're talking about anxious and avoidant, which is the two most common, and then there's secure. There's also the fourth one, which is anxious avoidant. But think of it like this. I think sometimes most people are coming from a space of, am I coming to this from my childhood experiences and who I've been for the majority of my life? I'm more of a person that has a fear of abandonment, or am I a person that is coming from a space of relationships scare me because I feel trapped, because they might suffocate me, because I don't have the ability to feel free, right? And so if you're worrying about the relationship that you're developing as a sense of this is kind of trapping me, you might be more avoidant, where you're looking to create emotional distance and you're much more reserved in the beginning of the relationship because you want to maintain that freedom and that autonomy, right? If a relationship to you is an indication of I'm losing my independence, understand that this is where the work is, because the relationship is combining two people, right? And if you're coming from a space of that abandonment posture, right, where I'm afraid that this person is going to leave me and I'm going to lose them, and what are they doing? And so you're constantly consumed with the individual. You're coming from it from a more anxious attachment style. And so understanding those dynamics in the beginning of a relationship and what you're looking for and how the person can meet their needs. This is what goes back to you doing your work. Are you meeting your own needs, right? Here's a great way to put it. If you were listening to Andrew Huberman, right? You love him. So I'll put it in his terms. He would call it autonomic self-regulation or autonomic self-soothing. Okay. Now, what does that actually mean? He's talking about the ability for a person to learn to self-soothe, to calm themselves down, to not look for external factors to create a sense of peace or calmness or rationality within the relationship. Can you provide that for yourself? So if you're an overly anxious person, but I'm looking for my partner to provide validation and acknowledgement and safety, I would say you're entering this relationship in a space that is unhealthy and likely to create a higher likelihood of creating more problems. Why? Can't you learn to validate yourself? Can you learn to acknowledge your accomplishments and recognize who you've been? Can you learn the tools to calm your nerves, to use rationality to make your way through life? You don't need another person to do those things. But if you're not addressing that, but you're bringing that into the relationship, you're not learning to calm yourself. You're not learning to regulate yourself. You're not looking for your internal cues. You're looking for everybody else in the rest of the world to provide that for you. And who better than the most significant relationship of your life, your partner, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your husband, your wife? Well, that's a lot of pressure to put on somebody. And how are they supposed to be responsible for controlling your emotional state? And not just your emotional state, but how you make your way through the world. And so this is where, when Jordan Peterson is talking about, are you the ideal partner? Are you the person that they're looking for? Because everybody will give you a list of adjectives they're looking for in a partner, and that list is endless. Tall, dark, and handsome. I want them to make money. I want them to be successful. I want them to be in charge. I want them to be spontaneous and creative and yada, yada, and a great parent, right? And then you'll hear the same thing on the other side of the coin for women. I want a woman who, is respectful and loyal and committed and beautiful and has a great career and understands how to meet a man's needs and give him time and space and all this kind of stuff. Well, it's are you that person? If you're not, where's the expectation is that you're going to find that in somebody else but not provide it for them. And you're going to fall short. And no one is going to live up to those expectations. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really does start with you understanding yourself, mm-hmm. having a deeper sense of yourself, who you are, what you want, and then what you're looking for in a partner from that. And I think at least when people are younger, they don't really think about that when they're dating. Mm-hmm. At least I didn't. I know a lot of people who I'm friends with didn't either. I don't know. Things are just a little bit easier. Mm-hmm. It's just different, especially in college and things like that. There's just so many people all the time, everywhere, and just different dynamics. But I think as you get older and you develop that sense of yourself, and then you're all right, wait, maybe I really need to sit down and think about these things, because otherwise I may be just attracting the wrong people, or I may be just falling into these old patterns. And then, you continue to ask yourself, oh, well, why am I always choosing really chaotic people? Why am I always choosing really huge, crazy personalities? What am I going after here? Is that something that I need to observe in myself? Do I really actually enjoy that? Do I like that? Where is this balance? But you have to know your own, I guess, center and really like what you are like seeking, because if you don't, and if you're not working on that for yourself to that point, like you can't ask for that from someone else. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I want you to do all of this, but I'm not going to bring anything here. Like it should be this mutual, like you're bringing different things, but you're both able to like help each other, because that is a relationship, and it's not this like one-sided thing. And that seems to be a weird kind of conversation in the world now. It's like one person isn't going, like you aren't just this like perfect person who doesn't get to do anything in the relationship. And then someone is just like going to shower you with every single thing that you've ever wanted. And you're not doing anything to like reciprocate,
right.
Like, I don't know, like why that is even a conversation.
And I think it also comes to a space of understanding what expectations are entering a relationship with somebody. Like, Esther Perel calls it romantic idealism. And she's talked about this in a number of her talks and lectures. Romantic idealism is this expectation or this concept that the one person that I'm with, this is the person who is like my everything, right? Yeah. This is my best friend, my greatest lover, my financial equal, my emotional support, the father of my children, or the wife of my children, mother of my children, whatever it is, wife of my children, mother, and so my soulmate, my companion. And so the list goes on. And it's kind of like, well, who meets that standard? And so what ends up happening is, and this is the part where I want to create a little bit more of a picture. People have said over time, many relationship counselors have said, and psychologists have told you that the quality of your life is defined by the quality of your relationships. And so the first thing I would start to ask those people is put aside the romantic idealism for a second. Let's look at the rest of your life. What's the community that you've created within your life? And what are the quality of the relationships within your life? Okay. Who are your friends, your colleagues, your work, your physical space, all that? Because the reality is what has happened over time is we've taken what the community used to serve as a whole, and we've placed all that responsibility on one person. And that one person is now responsible for meeting the needs that an entire community used to be able to meet. And community is more prevalent in children than it is in adults, right? I have a 7-year-old son, and I start, just like for Christmas, his gymnastics coach, which he wasn't in gymnastics for that long, right? His gymnastics coach gave him a present, and he has a teacher at school who like is doing fun things with him. And he has his sister's friends who kind of come over for his birthday party, right? And so you start to look at just my son, and you look at the community that he has between teachers and parents and friends and coaches. And it's like, okay, there's an entire community that are actually servicing him as an individual, that are bringing him full speed and full circle in life, right? They're teaching him about right and wrong. There's all these people. Well, as we get older, that community actually shrinks. We don't turn to people as much for support. We isolate ourselves. We're adults now. We're supposed to be able to do things independently. We're not supposed to look for help or ask for help or get assistance. But so then the thing comes around where we're like, well, I'm looking for a relationship. Well, now this is the one person I'm going to share everything with, but I have no community anymore. And so I'll ask people, like, let's take a look at the rest of your life and what's the quality of those relationships? And are those relationships healthy and good? Because you'll look at people sometimes and all they have is like, well, I have like 4 or 5 friends. And so you think, okay, well, that's cool. They've got friends. They've got a little circle. But they have bitterness or anger or, these challenges with each one of their friends. And it's like
their friends are like in their own poor behaviors. You know what I mean? Like, oh, well, so-and-so's really fun, but they, drink every night and probably have a gambling issue and they don't know how to save money. And then, oh, this friend, used to do this, but they don't train anymore. They don't like, having people who are doing these things that are going to elevate you in a way that, like, again, are you living up to that like ideal standard of a person? And I think all of this kind of comes back to like, if you want to meet someone who's going to be at that level, like you have to be at that level as well. And that means investing in yourself, like physically, emotionally, like mental, all of these things, you know what I mean? Like you can't expect to be this kind of like, not have these goals for yourself, not pursue like this high level of whatever excellence looks like for you, and then be able to attract that. Right. Because like, that's not going to be, and nothing's equal. I hate to say like equal, but that's not going to be like, you're not coming into this in an equal position. Right. And maybe that's the wrong terminology. I'm not sure. Nobody cancel me. But, I think that the idea of like, you have to be holding yourself to that high standard. If that's what you truly are seeking, then that's how you're going to be able to attract that. And like you said, your other relationships in your life are also indicative of that, obviously like, you can't choose your family, that kind of a thing, but like the other people that like you choose to have in your life, and you can choose to have kind of a distance between some people in your family if they really are obviously causing these hindrances. So that's a different conversation. But the direct people who are in your life that you are choosing to seek out for either, advice or to do things and to grow and to have fun, whatever it is, like, what are those people doing as well? And we all have, everybody has that, crazy group of friends and whatever, but it's also like knowing, okay, like, I'm going to maybe see them every once in a while or do something with them every once in a while. But like the people that I really go to for advice, who are really sound here, I'm going to go do this and spend the majority of my time with people who are trying to like elevate their life or go at least in this similar-ish direction. And I'm going to spend my time there. Yeah. And that's how you can find people, which I know is kind of how we opened this, which I don't know if we really did a super great job of tying that all together, but finding people, right? Like, how are you going to, and this, I guess, doesn't just have to be with relationships. This could also just be friendships and things like that. But I think a lot of people struggle, like, well, where do I find someone, and it's never going to be something like, all right, we're going to go out tonight and we're going to find all these girls or guys or whatever. I mean, you might have that intention. It's kind of like, oh, we look cute, we're going to go out. But generally speaking, it never really happens like that. It's not like a movie, where you see someone across the bar and you're like, oh my God, that's the one. I mean, you might, but generally you might.
You can. And that's how people used to meet, though.
I know. And it's not necessarily that that's a bad thing either. But if you have maybe, let's say you've gone out a few times and you're like, well, this isn't working. Maybe finding places, again, those shared common values. Like, would you recommend when people are like, well, where should I find someone, like seeking out those, like people in those circles? Like where would you recommend if somebody's coming to you and like, Rick, I just can't seem to find anybody to date. Like, I don't know. I'm not, maybe I go in the apps, maybe I don't. I want to do stuff in person.
Yeah. Okay. So here's the deal. We as a society and a civilization existed before dating apps.
Yeah.
You can meet people without fucking dating apps. Okay. They are certainly a much more convenient way, but there's a danger that comes with dating apps in the sense that dating apps, the biggest issue with dating apps is it creates this idea that there's so many more options available to you. And what we know is if you have too many options, too many choices, then you become overwhelmed. And in the past, it was like you had one or two choices, right? You would date somebody or you would meet one or two people and you can make an educated decision off of those two people. And so I would tell you, like, tell your friends. You guys have any single friends? What are you doing in your life that you can possibly meet somebody? If you're not the type of person who's going out to bars all the time, that's fine. Can you meet people at the gym? Are you meeting people at work? That's where people used to meet. Friends would introduce them. They would meet at work. They would meet at the gym. They would meet within some proximity of their life. They would meet on a trip. They would take a seminar somewhere. They would meet someone, and that was it. And here's the thing. They didn't think that there was some dating app of like available singles everywhere. They looked within their community. They looked within the people that were around them, and they said, okay, this is who I'm going to date. Nowadays, you can get on, a dating app and you can start talking to women in Seattle. And you're like, well, what good does that do? Well, it's available options, and it gives you this sense that you're not alone. And it's like, well, there's women out there. And so you're going to start a relationship from a long distance perspective. Like, good luck. Instead of putting down the phone for a minute and saying like, okay, reach out to some of your friends and say, hey, I'm single. If you guys have any good friends or good people or whatever, who are the available people that you work with? I'm not saying start a workplace romance, right? Because there's certainly challenges with that as well. But that's how people generally meet. Now, do dating apps provide valid relationships? Yes. I know plenty of people who have met on a dating app who have gotten married and have children and have the life that they want. So it's not all bad.
But statistically speaking, obviously it's
just difficult
it's probable that it can happen. But maybe we're just so old school. But like, there's two things. One, I think the like unlimited amount of choices, right, can be very like overwhelming for people, and maybe create just kind of like a false reality, like good or bad, right? But also, again, this is always for me, like, and this maybe goes back to like the actions thing. I like getting to know someone like via texting or messaging is, I mean, I personally as an individual cannot think of something worse. Like me, I'm not speaking for everybody, I'm speaking for me. And I would say that a lot of people would probably feel the same, maybe not. I just, that to me, like within an hour of being with someone in person, I can tell so much more about them than 3 months of texting them.
Yes.
Like literally. And I'm not saying that people are on dating apps for 3 months. Like clearly the whole point is to like meet people and then, you know, get someone's number, meet up with them, presumably. But the like just kind of notion of like talking to people in that capacity, and not saying that you can't get to know someone that way, but it's like, if that's, I feel like that can throw off a lot of people's perception of things because that's just words and that's maybe not actions. Right. And that's kind of going back to like what you said in the beginning, like really observe people's actions, and not saying that words aren't actions because they are, but you know what I mean? Like, I think that the idea that like it should just be through there can be really hard for people because they can't pick up on these things. And especially if it is someone who's maybe like very charming with the way that they text and they're really thinking out their responses and all this. And then you get to meet in person and it's completely different, you know? Whereas if you would have met in person, you would be able to, and this is not saying that everybody who like, you know, obviously people can be a little awkward at first when you getting to know them. Like that's totally normal. You know, people are going to be awkward when you're first meeting them. I'm not saying you have to meet someone and they're like this perfect person, but the idea of being on an app and like just being so, one, the whole idea is just so superficial to me, which is also repulsive, but that's a different discussion. Like you're
don't judge it too harshly.
Oh, I'm sorry. Again, I don't know. That's just my own personal thing, but
that's fine. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah. The idea that like, if what we're saying here is if you're trying to look for people, like there is so much like in-person interactions and like in community interactions that you can be having. And it doesn't just mean that you need to go to a bar, you know, like that's not like some people, especially like, you know, if we're talking about like a club or whatever, like most people are going there, like they're not like, I'm going to find my future husband or wife. You know what I mean? Like generally speaking, and you might, not saying you can't, you know,
Look,
but
every time somebody tells me a bar story about meeting somebody, I always think
bars are different than clubs.
I always think of my friend V. She's like this really sweet, very pretty, friend of mine, old colleague that I used to have. She totally saw a guy in a bar and she was like, this is how her and her husband met. She's like, I like him. And she was wasted. And she just like went up to him out of the clear blue sky and was like, you're buying me a drink.
Oh my God.
Like just sat down next to him, totally picked him up. And then like years later, they have like 2 or 3 kids. You know, they're a really great couple.
That's funny.
And I always tell her, I'm like, God, your husband's beautiful. Like, how did you do that?
How did you do that?
I'm like, he's stunning. He's so handsome.
He's like, I don't really have a choice. Like this girl said I have to buy her a drink.
Pretty much.
And I'm not like, clubs are very different than bars.
Yeah.
And you know that.
There are. And I'm not saying like go to a club, like, you know, understand your environment. But what I am saying is just put yourself in a space to meet new people, to do things,
Yes.
look within the community.
That's what we're trying to get at.
Your entire community, not just, you know, bars, but like where are you going? What are you doing? Who are you interacting with? And this again speaks to the quality of the relationships that exist in your life. And, you know, obviously one of the things that can happen in a relationship is you start getting into a relationship and what you see is the person's community start to shrink because then they become more reliant on the relationship. And what I would want, the ideal thing is to keep your community alive, to keep those other relationships and those aspects alive. Because then, you know, sometimes one of the issues that develop is one person's got a strong community and the other person's community is kind of shrank. And so one person's like, oh, hey, I want to go out with these friends this night. And the other person starts to get lonely or anxious or has problems with it because they don't have those outlets and those friendships and those connections. And so here's another piece that I really want to bring into this conversation. And this is something that has become much more relevant later in life. And I don't think it's a message that many young kids, teenagers get. Is that relationships, to me, the best relationships are ones where they are designed and your role is to serve. Your job in a relationship is to serve the other person. And I think all too often, especially in today's society, we look at it from this individualistic perspective. What is this person going to do for me? I'm looking for these qualities. Why? Because they're going to enhance my life. Rather than recognizing the role that a person has in a relationship is to actually serve the other person. And if I have two people who come to the relationship with like, it's my job to serve them and their job, and that person's thinking it's my job to serve them. Well, now I have two ends working to meet in the middle. And I don't have individual A and individual B. I just have couple C. And so it's a huge shift in your mindset to say like, okay, what's good for me as an individual might not be what's good for the couple. And if it's not good for the couple, I don't do it, right? And this is the concept and the mindset of putting the other person first. My job, your role in a relationship is really to service that other person, to be of service to them. And I don't know if that's a message that younger generations are getting. I think it comes from this like really selfish space. And I'm thinking to myself like, well, that's a really contradictory message to bring into a relationship. And now I'm not saying, don't take this to an extreme and become codependent where we're only thinking about the other person and like they only exist and like where we're obsessing over that. And I'm not talking about that extreme. But I am talking about there is a very big difference between saying what's good for me as an individual versus what's good for the relationship. And if I'm acting from a space of what's good for me more often than I am the relationship, you're going to find more arguments and fights. And then you're going to want to tune into our old podcast about arguments and fights. But shameless plug.
Shameless plug for last episode.
But I want people to recognize that role. And maybe it's a little bit, as you get older and you've been through a series of relationships, perhaps in your life, and you start to recognize, you've changed as a person, right? Maybe your career is established finally, and you're in a good space or you're in a different space, and so the healthier relationships. And this is something that, on a personal note, this is one of the things that I've been recognizing and discovering, even within myself, as I've been looking back and saying, like, I was too selfish. I was focused on me, my goals, my priorities, and I wasn't of service to the other person. And I failed the relationship in that aspect. And that's great that you take responsibility for it. But the next step is to make changes. And so I would ask you, when you're thinking about your relationship, how are you really conceptualizing it? Is this within terms of you and yourself and what the other person does for you? Or are you looking at it in terms of like, what is my role and how am I helping my partner become the best version of themselves and achieve and accomplish their things? And how am I really investing in us and not just me?
Mm-hmm. And I think that the cultural message now, like you nailed it, is absolutely the opposite of that. Mm-hmm. Like we are individuals to the highest extent, you know what I mean? Also, like this other person should be doing at least from my perspective, the messaging is like very individualist, and it's also like this other person should be doing all these things for me. Well, how does that make sense? Like, you know what I mean? Like, how can you expect somebody to do all these things for you and also be an individual, right? Because the math is not math in here. Like, that just doesn't add up. And I think that the more kind of traditional relationship, or maybe the more, older school message would be that of like service and union and all of that. And thinking to like kind of the current state of where things are at, like it makes sense why there's like, less successful relationships, marriages, all of that, and there's of course a million different reasons as to why those numbers have increased, and, we're not going to get into that. But I do think that is something that a lot of like the messaging just in general kind of culturally is completely off base with that. And then also I think, like you said, it is something that you learn as you age and mature and maybe have gone through things, because it's not something that like most people just like wake up and have. Like in a younger perspective, it might be maybe more codependent thing, but then that's not like, that's only one person then kind of serving and the other person isn't. So I think that message is really, really important, but it has to be like, all right, this is where like both individuals are at. And until you're there, it's kind of like, but that's the tough thing. It's like, okay, so until you're there, does that mean you don't date at all?
No, no.
And I know this is a rhetorical question.
Right. But but understand that I think with age and life experience, obviously with life experience comes age too. Yeah. You become a little bit more aware of the reality rather than the fantasy, rather than creating this like strict set of ideals, right? And I don't want to call them, just a fantasy, but it's like, okay, I think you develop a sense of what you think the world is, and then there's the reality of what the world actually is. And I think sometimes through those life experiences, you start to recognize this is what it actually is. and it's not what I thought it was. And so you're starting to, what we call come of age, so to speak. You're starting to mature. You're not a naive person anymore. And so I think you can start to grasp that concept a little bit more versus, younger kids who are growing up with just this sense of I'm an individual and I'm the only person that really matters. And this is what's good for me. And this is where, we can get into child development and all that kind of stuff. But, I think children oftentimes are very selfish and self-centered. And it isn't until you get a little bit older that you start to recognize and start to feel a little bit more attached to the community and the people that are around you and recognizing what your role and what relationships really are. Mm-hmm. And so it's an important aspect. And I don't think it's talked about enough in committed, serious relationships. And I don't think it's a message younger generations have gotten.
Definitely not. But what would you say when people are interested in dating and they're not maybe sure that they're there quite yet, right? Like, is this something that you believe unfolds in the relationship? Or is this something that you think needs to be like, kind of how we talked about before, like you need to understand like your own values and like who you are and what you're interested in before you date someone, right? Like that should be something that you're working on yourself. Would you say that for people who are maybe single or dating, if they're not in this headspace, that maybe they should be forward with someone about this, mm-hmm. or they should not be dating, right? Like, where is that line of like, maybe you have that understanding, like maybe I'm not there quite yet, but I would like to be, or is that just something that you see kind of develops over time?
Look, if you're a train wreck.
Okay, I'm not talking about a train wreck, but like what you described is like pretty serious, you know what I mean? And not everybody is maybe at that stage quite yet, is what I'm saying.
You're going to date regardless of what my opinion is on this, but
I know that.
I want people to be, you can be aware of something and be working on something and still date. Okay. You don't have to be this pristine version of yourself and figure out all these things. Like no one does. I don't, and every person, combining two people when you meet somebody is an art, mm-hmm. a lot more than it is a science at times. And so if you're working on yourself and you're aware of these things and you can look at past relationships, all of them, the ones with your mom and your dad and your brothers and your sisters and your friends, and the quality of those relationships and what the quality of relationships are now, you can do work and enter into a relationship and still have it be successful, because one of the fundamental factors of successful relationships is your ability to grow together, right? So you could be completely put together in your 20s. Right? But we've talked about this. By the time you get into your 30s, you're going to be a very different person. That doesn't mean you're going to fall apart, but it can mean your perspectives, your opinions, your views on the world are going to change. And so if your value system has changed, are you and your partner growing together? Are their value systems changing and they're moving in the same direction? Do we have some of the same goals? Do we have common interests and shared interests? And that's another thing. Have a few shared interests with somebody. When somebody is so different from you, where's the commonality and the common ground to stand on? Now, I'm not saying you both have to be like bodybuilder competitors. You know what I mean? I'm not saying you both even have to love the gym, but it's like, do they have a passion in their life? Do you have a passion in your life? If you do, great. But what similarities do you have together? What common interests do you have where you guys can share that? You're like, oh, I love country music. You love country music. Great. Like, there's a commonality. We can go to concerts together, right? Lauren just gagged for those of you who are listening to this. My eyes. Sorry. EDM. Do you like EDM? I like EDM.
Why did you change your
I don't know.
I like EDM. Like, why did you do that?
I don't know. I was about to start beatboxing.
Oh my God.
Let's stop.
Let's know. But yes, having common interests, having things that you can do, obviously having like a separate life, separate friends, separate things that you do on your own, but having those common interests to be able to like, let's do some of these things together. You know what I mean? And they don't have to be big things. It could be similar kind of music or like movies or like, oh, I love this kind of food or like love trying this, like whatever it is, and there certainly can be differences because sometimes obviously, you could probably argue being too similar could be of a hindrance as well, right? Because then you're only maybe kind of blindsided to certain things. Anyways, there has to be something there. And that's where maybe when you are more secure in your kind of like beliefs and things that you're interested in and what you're working towards, like you will find people who are kind of in those spaces because they have those similar interests as well. If you're going to like business conferences, right? Like you're probably going to find other people there who are probably interested at least in like being an entrepreneur or working hard or build, whatever. So it's like, okay, like at least we have common ground here. Maybe everything else is completely different, but like that's going to be like a place to start. Like people here are interested in the same kind of thing. Obviously the gym is like an easy one, right? Like, okay, you're at the gym. I'm at the gym. We both like gym. Like, right. Like, so there's going to be certain things. I'm not saying you need to go to the gym. Be like, sup, you want to go on a date? Like, hey, let's maybe not do that.
Well, approaching somebody the right way.
You like start stretching on the next machine. You're like, so do you like country music or EDM? Your face will tell me how I'm going to proceed.
Yeah, well, okay. No, that's actually not a horrible pickup line.
Hey.
If it's used, not a pickup line, but an entry into a conversation.
But yeah, so there's so many different aspects to this, which is kind of why we just wanted to have this like open discussion, because there's not really there's so many ways to approach this kind of common question, but I think it really comes down to like knowing yourself, knowing who you are, knowing who you want to be, what you want out of a partner, what you want out of a relationship. And then you will start to attract those people, and then really being like forward and communicative early on. Right. And I know that, like, to try to summarize what you were saying, like, it can feel uncomfortable at times, but it's better to feel uncomfortable a week or two in versus 3 or 4 months in and you're still kind of unsure as to like what's going on. Because if that person is on that same page with you, they will totally understand, and then if not, then it's like, all right, well, maybe this isn't the right time or the right person or whatever it might be. But I think that a lot of people now especially really struggle in that initial period because everybody is kind of tiptoeing like, I don't know if I want to date, if I want to date multiple people, if I'm kind of want to be single but maybe hook up. Like everybody's kind of in this weird space of what's everybody's deal, like what's going on. And so I think that being more communicative early on, and then to really summarize what you said, after you have been, then observing those actions and behaviors and not just the words that someone is saying. Would you say that that's like a good summary of what you said?
Yeah. Remind yourself that when you're looking for the right person, look within yourself. It's not about the other person because you can't control who's going to come in and out of your life. You can't control who's going to be at these places, at these destinations. But what you do have control over, you absolutely have control over yourself, your actions. So are you working on yourself? Are you becoming, if you're going to put this in like maybe actionable steps or kind of like a 1, 2, 3, 4, first and foremost, recognize, are you the partner you're looking for in someone else? Number 2, learn to self-regulate, learn to calm your emotions and learn to acknowledge and validate and recognize and understand that you don't need a partner to provide those things for you. Number 3, stop expecting the one person that you're with to be everything in the world to you. That like romantic idealism goes out the window. Look to build your community. Stop putting the enormous amounts of pressure on this relationship and this relationship only to meet all of your needs. Be communicative. Learn to express your needs and be uncomfortable. It's going to happen. But if this is the person who you're intimate with, then be intimate and express and touch into that vulnerability and create safe spaces for each other to do that, to express your needs, your desires, your interests. And remember that if this is a relationship and you're not just looking to date, which again, if you're dating multiple people, you're not doing yourself any favors here. There's a difference between dating 1 or 2 people versus if you're pulling up your app and you're talking to 5, 6, 7 people, you're wasting your time. More than likely, none of those relationships will evolve into anything. But recognize that the role in a relationship is to serve. And if I have 2 people who are putting each other's needs first, then the relationship is really going to come from a really healthy, productive, fulfilling space. It'll have more meaning, more purpose to it because you won't feel alone. You'll feel like you have a partner and you'll recognize like I'm putting this person first. They're putting me first, which means the relationship is coming first. You're not coming at it from individual perspectives. You're coming at it as a couple, as a unit, as one rather than each other. And so those are some basic kind of guidelines, and get out, you guys, like get into the community, talk to your friends, reach out to people, go places, do things, experience life, challenge yourself, take new experiences and opportunities and do different things. And you'll be surprised who you interact with and who you meet with and who your friends might hook you up with or who might walk into your life that day. And when they do, you'll be ready for it. And if you're working on yourself, that's the best thing you can do for a relationship.
That's why I was asking those questions. Like, don't feel like you can't get into something if you are still working on it. Like, nobody is perfect. And I think sometimes people can hear stuff like this and they're like, oh my gosh, I have so much to do. Like, I can't be dating anybody or I'm not ready for this. And maybe you're not, but the idea is that this is a constant process. So don't feel and don't judge yourself so much if you're like, oh, I need to be working on these things. Like, it's okay. Like, almost everybody is. But knowing that and actually committing to that work, even if you are starting to date people, of course, is super important. That's not a pass now that you're dating someone, that you get to stop all of that. But don't use that as a way to I guess, scare yourself out of, looking for something. So this was a little all over the place, but I liked it. I'm glad we touched on a bunch of different things, and hopefully we summarized that for you guys pretty well at the end there. So thank you guys for listening as always. So if you're interested in reaching out to Rick for counseling, you can check the email below, but say it.
FullCircleTherapyFL@gmail.com.
I was like, look, you got it on item. Okay, that's the email. If you guys have any questions about coaching or the other content that we put out, you can visit teamlocofit.com. And if you are interested in signing up for our app, you can visit redefinehealthyapp.com. And we will talk to you guys next Wednesday.